The Street, a novel by Anne Petry, 1912 to 1997. She is also the author of The Narrows, Country Place, and Miss Muriel and Other Stories. The Street was her first novel. Now, let's read The Street. There was a cold November wind blowing through 116th Street. It rattled the tops of garbage cans, sucked window shades through the top of open windows, and set them flapping back against the windows. And it drove most of the people off the street in the block between 7th and 8th Avenues, except for a few hurried pedestrians who bent double in an effort to offer the least possible exposed surface to its violent assault. It found every scrap of paper along the street: theater throwaways, announcement of dances and lodge meetings. The heavy wax paper of loaves of bread had been wrapped in, the thinner wax paper that had enclosed sandwiches, old envelopes, newspapers. Fingering as his way along through the curb, the wind set the bits of paper to dancing high in the air, so that a barrage of paper swirled into the faces of people on the street. It even took some time to rush into doorways and airways and find chicken bones and pork chop bones and push them along the curb. It did everything it could to discourage people walking along the street. It found all the dirt and dust and grime on the sidewalk and lifted it up so that the dirt got into their noses, making it difficult to breathe. The dust got into their eyes and blinded them, and the grit stung their skins. It wrapped newspaper around their feet, entangling them until the people cursed deep in their throats, stamped their feet, and kicked at the paper. The wind blew it back again and again, until they were forced to stoop and dislodge the paper with their hands. And then the women grabbed their hats, pried their scarves from their necks, and stuck his fingers inside their coat collars and blew their coats away from their bodies. The wind lifted Lutie Johnson's hair away from the back of her neck so that she felt suddenly naked and bald, for her hair had been resting softly and warmly against her skin. She shivered as the cold fingers of the wind touched the back of her neck, explored the sides of her head. It even blew her eyelashes away from her eyes, so that her eyeballs were bathed in a rush of coldness, and she had to blink in order to read the words on the sign swaying back and forth over her head. Each time she thought she had the sign in focus, the wind pushed it away from her, so she wasn't certain whether it said 3 rooms or 2 rooms. If it were 3, why, she would go in and ask to see it. But if it said 2, why, it wasn't any point. Even with the wind twisting the sign away from her, she could see that it had been there for a long time, because its original coat of white paint was streaked with rust, where years of rain and snow had finally eaten away the paint off down to the metal, and the metal had slowly rusted, making a dark red stain like blood. It was 3 rooms. The wind held it still for an instant in front of her and then swooped it away until it was standing at an impossible angle on the rod so that it suspended it from the building. She read it rapidly: 3 rooms, steam heat, parquet floors, respectable tenants, reasonable. She looked at the outside of the building. Parquet floors here meant that the wood was so old and discolored, no amount of varnish or shellac would conceal the scars and the old scraped places, the years of dragging furniture across the floors and hammer blows of time, and children and drunks and dirty slovenly women. Steam heat meant a rattling, clanging noise in the radiators early in the morning, and then a hissing that went on all day. Respectable tenants in these houses where colored people were allowed to live, included anyone who could pay rent, so some of them would be drunk and loudmouthed and quarrelsome, given to fits of depression when they would curse and cry out violently, given to fits of equally violent elation. And she thought, because the walls would be flimsy, while the good people, the bad people, the children, the dogs, and all the god-awful smells would all be wrapped up together in one big package. The package was called Respectable Tenants. The wind pried at the red skull cap on her head, as though it was angered because it couldn't tear it loose from its firm anchorage of bobby pins. The wind blew a great cloud of dust and ashes and bits of paper into her face, her eyes, and her nose. It smacked against her ears as though it were giving her a final, exasperated blow as proof of its displeasure in not being able to make her move on. Lutie braced her body against the wind's attack, determined to finish thinking about the apartment before she went on to look at it. Reasonable. Now that could mean almost anything. On 8th Avenue it meant tenements, ghastly places not fit for humans. On St. Nicholas Avenue it meant high rents for small apartments, and on 7th Avenue it meant great big apartments where you had to take in roomers in order to pay the rent. On this street it could mean almost anything. She turned and faced the wind in order to estimate the street. The buildings were old, with small slit-like windows, which meant that most rooms were small and dark. In a street running in this direction, there wouldn't be any sunlight in the apartments, not ever. It would be hot as hell in the summer and cold in winter. Reasonable here is dark, crowded street ought to be about $28, provided it was on the top floor. The hallways here would be dark and narrow. Then she shrugged her shoulders, forgetting an apartment here, where she and Bub would be alone, was most important than dark hallways. The thing that really mattered was getting away from Pop and his rattled woman. Anything would be better than that. Okay, I'm going to conclude now. This is page 4, chapter 1.